Hello, this is your lesson for exponents and scientific notation. Make sure that you have already completed your warm-up quiz and that you have the properties of exponents worksheet with you, which should look like this. Okay, so make sure that that's on your desk as well as your notebook, some scissors and glue we'll be using for later. So make sure your homework, even though this slide says that you're going to leave it on your desk, we're actually going to check that next class. So you can just kind of leave that out, and I'll check the homework that's due, that was due today, as well as the homework that is due next class, the Chapter 7 review problems. We'll check that all together next class. Okay, so go ahead and take a minute, and if you're sitting with somebody, a friend, one of your table partners, and go ahead and see if you can complete this chart. So go ahead and hit pause on the video, and then you can start it up in about a minute once the chart's completed. Okay, so hopefully you went ahead and filled this in. If you'll notice that each column here is being divided by 4, the way your powers go down. So when I go from here to here, this should turn to a 1. And then something different happens from here to here. When we're looking in the fraction form, it should go to 1/4. And we move down here, we divide by 4 again. It's 1/16, or you can think of it as 1 divided by 4 to the second power. And then when I get to the last column, it's 1/64, which is equivalent to 1/4 to the third power. So hopefully looking at that, you can kind of see when you have negative exponents, like 2 to the negative third power, you can go ahead and write them as this. Go ahead and think about how you would write this so that you wouldn't have a negative exponent. So think about it this way, you want to go ahead, and even though this is really 1 over 3 to the second, which once you simplify actually gives you 9. Okay? So instead, you can actually just move it up straight to the numerator. So go ahead and fill this chart in. You can do this on scratch paper. This is to the first power right here. Or you can do it in your notebook. That's fine too. Or it's, on your desk is okay too. Just make sure you clean off your desk before you leave today. Okay. Now looking at that properties of exponent sheet, go ahead and take a minute and fill in this chart here of expanding, and see if you can generate a rule about how to multiply numbers with the same base. What happens to your exponents when that? So go ahead and hit pause for a minute, and then we'll check the answers here in just a moment, whenever you're ready. Okay, so looking at this, we're going to go ahead and look at, hopefully you got 2 to the 8th. That's an 8, sorry. This should be 4 to the 8th. This one should be 3 to the 7th, x to the 5th, and 6, x to the 7th. When you're looking at multiplying numbers that have the same base, hopefully you've noticed that the pattern is just that the exponents are added together. That's a very important thing. The nice thing about exponents is that you can always kind of go back to that expansion and kind of what you know about exponents if you're still having some trouble remembering when to do each operation. So go ahead and take a minute and figure out those simplifying problems. You guys can work together on this. It's not independent work, so you can work together and discuss kind of what the difference between these problems are. But keep in mind the difference between the coefficients and the variables. Okay, so hopefully these are right, and just did them very quickly. checking these over, making sure that we're multiplying the numbers out front, the coefficients, and your exponents, we're just kind of merging them together. So the C's can go together, the D's cannot. So they just kind of stay separate within the term. And then this last one here, you have m to the negative 2, m to the negative 3. So that would be m to the negative 5. N to the 5th, n to the negative 6 would be n to the negative 1. So actually, when you go to simplify, just like we did kind of earlier, we're going to go ahead and move these numbers down to the denominator. Alright, so now go ahead and complete the next part where you're actually expanding this. So this would be 7 to the 2nd power raised to the 4th power. So that means we're going to have 7 to the 2nd times 7 to the 2nd times 7 to the 2nd times 7 to the 2nd, which would be 7 to the 8th. So go ahead and fill in the rest of this chart and then check back for answers. So go ahead and hit pause. So looking at the answers here, hopefully you see that the rule when you're raising a power to another power is that you're multiplying your exponents together. So each one of these you can expand and then combine and simplify, or you could just go ahead and multiply the exponents together. So for this one, be careful because since there's more than one term being raised to the 3rd, this is actually, if you were to expand, it would look like this. So for this one here, we can go ahead and multiply our coefficients together, which is going to be that 64, and then x to the 6th power. So go ahead and take a minute to finish up the rest of these, and then I'll put the answers up here so you can hit pause. Okay, and hopefully you can read my handwriting on here. It's a little sloppy. But for the first problem here that you were to work on, just making sure that you know that there's 3 2x squareds, so that means we have 8x to the 6th, and multiplying the coefficients together, 32, and then x to the 7th. For this one here, we have 3 of these here, so that means we have 2 x's, so that would be when we're multiplying 8x to the 3rd. We have 3 of these as well, so that's 64, and then 2 y's, and then 3 of those would be y to the 6th. And this one you can actually simplify after and get x to the 3rd over 8x to the y, 8y to the 6th. However, you could actually simplify this first and do 1 over 2, or just x over 2y squared. And for the last one on here, this is going to give you a negative exponent, so you can go ahead after you multiply that through the fraction and move that a to the denominator. Whenever you move a number into the numerator denominator, if there's nothing left in the place, you have to use that placeholder. Remember, there's always a coefficient of 1 in front of all of our variables. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on. The last page here, so go ahead and expand this. This should be on the back of your paper, and then I'll throw your answers up for you to check over. Okay, so looking at this, these all are simplifying to fractions. Remember that 1 over 4 to the 2nd power is 4 to the negative 2. And this one, we can actually simplify this fraction here too. So we can simplify the 4 6 to 2/3, and then this here will simplify to x to the 3rd. The last one, this simplifies here because it's just a fraction to negative 2 over 1, or just negative 2, and then our y's simplify to y to the 3rd in the denominator, and our x's simplify to x squared in the numerator. So go ahead and complete these last couple problems. I'll post the answers up here, and then I'll kind of show you what your next assignment is supposed to be. Okay, so go ahead and take a look here. This one just simplified the x is simplified to x squared, and the y is simplified to y to the 4th in the denominator. This one we simplified. It's very similar problems, just different placement of the parentheses, which changes kind of the value that's associated with that particular part of the term. So for this one here, we have 64x to the 3rd over x, which just simplifies to x squared, y over y to the 5th, which simplifies to y to the 4th, and then our numbers don't simplify, so we just leave them like that. And the last one, the 3 is going to the 4, but it also is going to x to the 3rd power, so there's an additional exponent on the inside variable, so that means this would be x to the 9th. And we have 64x to the 9th, but when I have it over this x in the denominator, it simplifies to x to the 8th, if you can read that. And 3 in the denominator with the x to the 4th, or y to the 4th. As well as the z, because the z doesn't have anything that matches with it, so it just kind of stays out front. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. If you could now go ahead and grab one of these if it hasn't been passed out to you yet, your exponent rules notes. You're just going to glue this in probably page 5 of your notebook, and it goes over each different type of property that we talked about. So negative numbers, moving them to make them positive, exponents that have 0. And if you want, think about why 0 to the 0 power would not be equal to 1, if you want to take a little extension on that. Multiplying numbers, variables with the same base. And remember thinking about it in these two different ways. Raising a power to another power and how that expands, as well as looking at the rule. And then the last part, which was what we just did, which was dividing numbers, variables with the same base. How we're really talking about subtraction. Or you can think of it even as the expansion and simplify. So take a minute and I want you, this is the second part of the lesson today, go ahead and expand these numbers from scientific notation first, then multiply them, you'll get some large number, and then write your answer back in scientific notation. Just as a reminder, scientific notation is numbers that are written that are 1 or larger, but are no larger, but stop at 10. 10's too large, so there can only be one digit. That numbers that fall between 1 and 10. So like 2.3 times 10 to the 3rd would be, oops, you'd multiply, move it over 3 times. So that would be 1, 2, 3. So we're looking at 2,300. Versus if you had 2.3 times 10 to the negative 3, you would move the decimal to the left. These indicate smaller numbers, 1, 2, 3. This number is less than 1. So just as a quick review, if you need to review up on scientific notation, there's so many resources out on that and just translating it. But for now, I want you to translate first and then go ahead and multiply. And then write your answer and see if you notice any patterns and maybe a shortcut. So go ahead and hit pause. You can do this either in your notebook, you can do this on your desk, loose leaf, and notice if there's any patterns. Okay, so hopefully you got these as your answer for each one of these. You may have noticed a pattern, at least with the first term, and then we'll kind of talk about that middle problem here in just a moment, and why that pattern might not apply. But we have for each one of these a different type of setup. So you'll notice here this would be 6, and then our exponent would be a 5. This one here, we're going to multiply these together, which gives us 6, and then when we put these exponents together, we get a positive 1. Now for this one, it's a little bit different because when I multiply these together, if I follow that same rule of multiplying the numbers out front and adding our exponents on the 10, we end up with 12 times, oops, that's why that's off. Well, this does happen sometimes. I'm like, where's the 13? It should be to the 8th power. This would be 12 times 10 to the 7th, and 12 is not scientific notation because it's larger than that number 10. So we can go ahead and rewrite it 1.2 times 10 to the 8th. So looking at that shortcut can be a little bit helpful when trying to multiply. You can always do it by hand, but sometimes if we have really large exponents, it's a lot faster just to do it by using that quick shortcut rule. So in your notebook, underneath where you did, or on the back of the page where you glued in the exponent rules, go ahead and complete these two problems here. Remember that this second problem is really just 6.0 times 10 to the negative 3 twice. So you'd first think of it like this, unless you can go ahead and jump straight to computing. And then that's pretty much it for today. So these here are the last two things. The next thing I want you to make sure that you're working on for next class, your homework, you can go ahead and get started now. This should be on the task sheet. The homework is in the chapter review, so take a look at that homework calendar because it's a little bit skipping because I'm doing a little bit from each section. And then next class we'll review, and then we'll have a quiz on complex fractions as well as exponents. However, next class, if you're looking at the homework calendar, we're actually not doing any new lesson. We're just going to probably spend the rest of class reviewing for our test that we have coming up on Thursday, Thursday the 21st. So on Tuesday, we'll be reviewing, taking a short quiz, and then we'll have our test on the Thursday afterwards. So if you have any questions about this lesson, you can always email me. My email is on that half sheet of paper that should have been given to you today. We'll just make sure that you guys are doing okay with that. And then so just make sure that you get your quiz, that you're prepared for your quiz, you get your homework done, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much, and have a great